So, you want a fun car, but it needs to be cheap because you pay $1,000 a month for foot pics on OnlyFans, which I can't blame you for, but lucky for you, I'm gonna unveil the holy trinity of cheap fun cars. So today we have 3 or 4 different cars to look at, and each one of them has a different drivetrain, because, in today's day and age, 21st century, you gotta get that real diversity of drivetrains. So basically, we're going to start with the front engine, front wheel drive car, and work our way down to the rear engine, rear wheel drive car, basically going in ascending fun order. And the first car on this list is a bonus, yeah! So I didn't want to throw this in on the original list because then I couldn't call it the Holy Trinity now, could I? Because that would be 4 cars, obviously. But also, this one doesn't really fit with the theme of the other cars. See, this is more of a commuter car that just happens to be fun, whereas the others are like purposely built to be fun. But it is all-wheel drive, and some people really need that. The rest of the cars are 2-wheel drive, so if you live somewhere where it's snowy, or maybe you just have to drive a rally stage whenever you go somewhere, then this is kind of the only car you can get. And it's also the lightest all-wheel drive car, so that's why it's the most fun all-wheel drive car, and the cheapest, and that's why it's on this list. But it's all-wheel drive, so it's still heavier. It's much heavier than the other cars, actually, and it's also much more expensive and probably less reliable because I think these things had an issue with the head gasket. I'm not too sure, but I may have heard that somewhere. But anyways, let's get on with the first car on this list, which is the PT Cruiser. Wait, no. Oh, sorry. That's next week's video for most sexiest cars. Anyways, the first car on this list is the Honda CRX. So this thing is basically just like a midget version of a Civic. It's lighter and shorter than an actual Civic, which means it's basically just better. It's more fun. And, it's still Honda though, so it's got that bulletproof engine, which is just going to be a screamer, like so fun to rev out. And then you have a manual transmission paired to that. And hopefully you get the manual unless you're an idiot. But basically, Honda manual transmission, you just bang through gears, no regard for the gearbox. You can abuse the hell out of that thing, and also, in addition to that, you get independent suspension, so, it's gonna be like a rally car, basically. One last thing, though, it is front-wheel drive, sadly, like all Hondas, but, front-wheel drive still has its own charm. My first car was actually a Civic with front-wheel drive. I couldn't stand it, but, it's still charming, and especially in this older car, you really get a feel through the steering wheel, so you can, feel it, you feel the torque steer, or feel it scrabbling for grip with its little front paws. So it can be charming, it can be fun, but you can't drift. So just a little bit less fun than rear-wheel drive. Now, we need to talk about the typical owner of this thing, and I say owner in air quotes because no one actually buys this thing, they just steal it. And this is the type of person to be unemployable anywhere. Even McDonald's, they can't keep a job, maybe because they don't show up. But because of that, they still live in their parents' house, where they just play Call of Duty all the time. And as a consequence, they've never actually finished a homework assignment, despite making it through 10 years of school before they dropped out. But still, that's pretty impressive, honestly. Also impressive is how their diet consists of just Cheetos and Monster. Honestly, it's amazing that someone can survive on just that, but CRX owners do it. And speaking of Monster, this thing inevitably has some Monster sticker somewhere. Anyone who's this much of a skid has to have Monster stickers. It's pretty much a rule. There'll probably be at least one sticker on the interior because there's going to be a lot of stuff on the interior. They do not have a garbage can in their car. They just have the passenger footwell. So they just put empty beer cans, soda bottles, used condoms, cigarette butts. It doesn't matter. It all gets tossed down there. So, as a first or only car, I gave this thing a 64% rating overall. It gets a 9 out of 10 for funness. It's front-wheel drive, so what are you gonna do? It gets a 9 out of 10 for coolness because it doesn't really have as much of a reputation as the other cars. 8 out of 10 for costness, because you can actually get a decent one of these for $5,000 or even under. So that's a good rating for that. And then it's a Honda. It's gonna be pretty cheap to run. 5 out of 10 for practicalness, because it only has 2 seats, but, it's a hatchback, so you can get quite a bit of stuff in there. And then this thing's not going to be that great on the freeway. Plus, it's only two-wheel drive, so if it snows or you have to take a long road trip, you're going to have some trouble. It won't be that fun. And then for safeness, 1 out of 10. This thing, there was no airbags offered. No airbags at all. And this thing is tiny. It's just a straight-up tin can. I mean, all these cars are, because that's kind of the point. But if an SUV hits you in this, it's game over. You're just dead. So if you can't find a second generation CRX in your area, there's also the Mark I CRX, which I think it has a carbureted engine. It's also a bit smaller and lighter, so that may be more fun, but it also makes less power, and you have to fuck with a carburetor, which is gonna be a bitch. And then the third generation is actually the CRX Del Sol. So it's less rigid, it's heavier, but it's convertible, so that's kind of nice. And then something like, there's a lot of other similar cars. I mean, you have the Civic, you have the early Integras, early Preludes, like basically anything small, light, and front-wheel drive. And hopefully with some independent, nice, stiff chassis, you'll get similar driving experience, similar fun front-wheel drive, little rascal fun car. Now anyways, let's move it on to the Mazda Miata. So I actually have one of these bad boys, and I'm going to talk about why they're so fun. Well, first of all, this thing has a fun engine. I mean, just revving this thing out, once you get to like 7,000 RPMs, it's insane. It's screaming, and it's like torturing a rabbit. It's so satisfying. And of course, it has rear-wheel drive, unlike the Honda, so you can drift, especially if you get the LSD. I mean, rear-wheel drive, such a big deal in these fun cars. And then, it's a convertible. I mean, I have a hardtop. I'm not really a fan of the convertible, but some people really like that, especially a woman. And as a little fun fact that kind of alludes to how fun this car is, the Mazda Miata actually has the highest rate of conviction for reckless driving of any car in the States, which is amazing. I mean, you have Mustangs and Camaros on the same list, and they're not even close to the freaking Miata, which is the most common reckless driving car. So the thing I've noticed about the owners of these cars is that most of them have those stickers that say like sad boys or like a picture of a broken heart on their car, because they just love being sad. I mean, they're middle class, but they still hate their life somehow. I mean, maybe it's because they never leave the room and they just play video games all day, but then they wonder why they're sad, and so they go out to their car and they put this little sad sticker on, I'm so lonely and sad, and then they wonder why nobody wants to be their friend. When you show up to high school or your work and you have this stupid sticker on your car that says, oh, I'm not meant for true love, everyone is laughing at you. You think you look cool, or like, maybe you're gonna get pity. No, everyone sees that and they're just stifling their laughter because you honestly look so stupid. But I mean, that's just the reality. That is just Miata owners. Not saying that's myself, but 90% of Miata owners, this is what they do. And it's self-fulfilling. I mean, you put this sticker on your car and you drive, especially on your windshield, you just see, whenever you're driving, you just see sad boys. And then you're driving and you're like, I'm so sad. And you wonder why you're sad. But anyways, that's enough of that rant. Basically, all Miata owners are just pussies. For the rating, I give this thing a 62% overall if you want it to be your only car or your first car. And it gets a 10 out of 10 for the funness. I mean, obviously, it's a Miata. It's probably one of the best cars you can get for bang for your buck and funness. And then we move on to the coolness. It gets a 7 out of 10 because, honestly, the looks, I cannot give it more than 2 out of 5. I mean, I'm sorry, but just stock, it does not look cool. You can make it look good, but it's still, once it's a stock car, it doesn't look that good. However, it gets a 5 out of 5 for reputation because, I mean, obviously, like, it's a Miata. People love these cars. Like, I have one, I always get compliments, and people don't even think it's like a girl's car. They don't even joke about it, which I thought they would, but no, people love it. And get 6 out of 10 for costness because it's pretty cheap to run. I mean, they are getting older now, but they're still cheap to run. The only problem is that they've appreciated a lot, and so most of them are over $5,000. It's gonna be hard to find a good example for $5,000. I mean, you can definitely do it still, but, And then it gets a 4 out of 10 for practicality. I mean, obviously, it's not gonna be practical. It only has 2 seats. The trunk is tiny. Dude, the 2 seats sucks. Yeah, I mean, if you get the LSD, like I took it out in the snow and that was great because I mean rear wheel drive in the snow is just so fun, dude. And then like you can also people turn them into rally cars or off roaders. Like you can do anything, so it is practical, but you can't. It's not really. It's versatile, but not practical. And then it gets a 4 out of 10 for safeness because some of them had airbags. I think it was like 92 to 90, like 99 or something. They did have airbags, but if you get like a 1.6, the first generation, then you're not going to have an airbag. And this thing is small and it's light. So like the CRX, if you get hit with an SUV or even like a regular Civic, you're just dead. So, I mean, you got to drive it carefully. Now, as far as related cars go, you can also get the NB Miata, which I kind of recommend. I mean, they're around the same price as the NAs. They're newer, so they're going to be cheaper to maintain. And, you know, some people think they look better, and they kind of do. And I think they may drive better as well. Also, there's the BMW Z3, so that's sort of similar. It's got a straight six, so more power, but it's also heavier and a bit bigger. And then there's other small rear-wheel drive cars, like, all over. You know, you have the Silvia, the RX-7, like, there's a ton of other small rear-wheel drive cars that you can get. But the Miata's really just the, like, freaking icon, bro. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the last car. The one you've been most waiting for because I said it was going to be the most fun. And that is the Toyota MR2, specifically the first generation. So obviously, this thing gets a 10 out of 10 for funness, which I'll cover in a sec. But basically, it's mid-engine, okay? That's why they call it the MR2, because mid-engine, rear-wheel drive two-seater. So it rotates so easily. I mean, you have all the weight in the middle, so it really, it doesn't take a lot to turn it. And that can work for you or against you. I mean, if you don't know how to drive, then you're going to spin and hit a tree and die. But, I mean, it makes it better for handling and driving around corners at a fast rate. And also, this thing's pretty beatable. I mean, it's a Toyota. What are you going to do? You're not going to blow up the engine from just taking it to red line if it has oil in it. But, yeah, I mean, this thing's going to be totally fun. And then it's small. It's small like a Miata. It's a bit heavier than the Miata, but not so much that you'll notice it that much. And, I mean, dude, this is basically a budget freaking Ferrari. Mid-engine. I mean, that's basically the only similarity. But, you know what I'm saying. Dude, a cheap mid-engine car, that's why this is the most fun car on the list. And also, since it's mid-engine, you have more weight on the rear axle. Dude, you're going to have insane launches. Because when you freaking dump the clutch, all the weight transfers to the back wheels. And you just go, you freaking fly ahead like a spaceship. I mean, this thing's not that fast, but it'll still be fun to, do launches in and race people. Now, moving on to the typical owner of this car. I mean, this guy is just a straight up daredevil. He's probably the type of person to use those squirrel suits or skydive and also play poker. Maybe that's his profession, is just playing poker. I mean, this guy is a daredevil. Every day, you're basically taking a 50-50 chance of whether you're going to die in it. So, I mean, this guy just loves that thrill. And also, this is a future executive. This guy's going to be probably a billionaire when he grows up. This is just a placeholder for his future Ferrari and Bugatti. Also, he wears a suit everywhere he goes. Even when he goes to, like, Taco Bell, he's wearing a suit. It doesn't matter. He's basically just James Bond, except, like, 19 years old with acne. And, this thing looks so good that people will probably think it costs more money when they see it. Because, I mean, he's wearing a suit anyways. But it literally looks like a spaceship. And they're so rare, like, nobody's seen one before. If you pull up with a big spoiler and it's lowered and, like, maybe a wide body, it'll look so good. And people will just be, like, in awe of your car. So as far as the rating goes, I get this thing a 60% overall. It gets a 10 out of 10 for funness because obviously, I mean, rear-wheel drive, mid-engine, and tiny size, that is just a recipe for disaster. I mean, fun. And 10 out of 10 for coolness as well. Obviously, this thing is it looks so good. And then also, it has a sick reputation. Like, people know what this car is, and even if they don't, they'll just think it's some kind of Ferrari, like, automatically. So, obviously, 10 out of 10 coolness there. The costness, 6 out of 10, because it is kind of hard. It's like the Miata. It's a bit more expensive than $5,000. You can find one for $5,000 or even like $3,000, but it's going to be a bit of a fixer-upper. Then the practicalness is 3 out of 10 because it's a mid-engine car, so it literally has like fuck all for storage room and only 2 seats. So it's like the Miata, but a bit worse. And then the safeness is the worst. That's why it's so low. It's 1 out of 10 because none of these cars offered airbags. And, I mean, it's literally a mid-engine car that's small and light. It's basically just trying to kill you all the time. So, of course, it's going to have a terrible safety rating. Now, if you're looking for alternatives to this, there is a second and a third generation of this car. So the second generation is probably a bit safer. I mean, it's definitely newer, but it's also a bit heavier, so you don't really get that same go-kart feel. And then there's the Mark III, which is less loved, admittedly, and there's no hardtop version, so that's a bit unfortunate. But yeah, these are both good alternatives, and you can find them for like under 10 grand for sure. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll probably enjoy the other videos on my channel, as well as the ones in this playlist where I have a bunch of cars for students or your first car that you can buy for around $5,000. So then you should probably look at that playlist, and then maybe you could think about like perhaps getting one of these cars, but then